Good evening. Don't you just want to be at a rager just having fun with that music? Sorry, maybe not so much. Good evening. My name is Sam Proutz. I'm one of the pastors here. Thanks for being here at Urban Community Church this evening on a Saturday night. Before I get too far, I want to say something I don't want to forget about. At 7 p.m. tonight, there's going to be even more worship happening. If you enjoyed that, you definitely want to come back. There's going to be an extended time of worship happening at 7 p.m. It's going to be great. I can't wait to be there. But in the meantime, between 6 and 7, after the service and before the worship time, there's going to be pizza downstairs, and it's free. So just show up and grab some pizza. It'll be great. Feel free to go down there and grab that after the service. It should be a fun time. And then there's free babysitting during the service. So if you have kids and you want them to have some place to hang out with, it's one of the babysitters we use, so she's great. So you'll be in good hands. That's a good deal. So go ahead and do that after the service. Also, as you just noticed, we're in the series we're calling Drones. We're calling it Drones, and this kind of unusual thing to be calling a sermon series because for me, the idea of drones is a little offsetting. You think about them seeing everything, and it's a little uncomfortable to think that they're watching you. But we're talking about it in the sense that as much as these things, as much as these drones know and can see, they've got nothing on God. They're nowhere near God. And to me, that's quite comforting because while those people that are controlling the drones may have ulterior motives, I know God's motives, and God's motives are great for me and great for you. So to me, as we talk about these characteristics of God, of the all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful God that we have, this all-knowing nature of Him, I get excited. Because we get to know just how amazing this God is that we worship. So we're going to go further into that this evening. We're going to go into God's omniscience. It's a fun word. You want to say it with me? Omniscience. One more time. Omniscience. That's God's all-knowing character. All right, we're good. God's all-knowing character. I think that's pretty awesome. I have a question, though, for you as we talk about that. If I were to have a piece of paper, it's kind of a trivia question, so you can answer me if you'd like. If I were to have a piece of paper, and I were to fold it in half, and then fold it in half again, and then again and again and again, until I got to 50 times. Don't shout it out if you know the answer, if you heard this before, but how high would that piece of paper reach, or how wide would it be? Does anybody feel like they know? You can raise your hand. I'm not going to ask you to say it. Would it surprise you to know that that piece of paper would reach all the way to the sun? Did that blow anybody's mind like it blew mine this last week when I read that? Isn't that crazy? Right? It's wild. It would reach all the way to the sun. And we know this. We know this as humans, not because anybody's done it. They've never been able to fold a piece of paper that many times, but we know this because we can calculate, we can measure, we can test, and because we can do all of those things, we can predict things like how far a piece of paper folded 50 times would reach. I think that's pretty amazing. I think that's pretty wow-inspiring, the fact that we can know something like that without ever actually doing it in physical form. Just the fact that we can figure out something like that is amazing. Well, I wasn't the best student in school as far as science and math. I was fine, but it wasn't the thing that I loved and wanted to know everything about and ace the tests on. I didn't ace any of the tests on those two subjects. I did well enough to be curious about it. I was curious about it. I don't know if you're like me in that sense. I go to the CNN.com if I were to go visit a website. If I went to CNN.com, I wouldn't read the news stories. I'd read the tech stories because I'm just so curious. How long is it going to take before I've got a jetpack or something? Because it's going to be cool. I mean, it feels like it's coming very quickly. And when you think about it, there's all this fascinating stuff that happens in our world. For starters, planes fly. At one point in time, not that long ago, that was seemingly a miracle. Planes fly and they carry hundreds of people, thousands of people across oceans. Doctors, this is a great one, right? They can see inside your body without a knife. Thank the Lord. That's a really good thing, that they can see inside our bodies without a knife. We have computers that can calculate unfathomable amounts of numbers and data in amounts of time that just blows you away. It can happen so fast. And what's more is those computers that once filled up entire rooms, like buildings, now fit in your pocket with a phone or on your wrist with a watch, even more so. And I've got this watch here. I can go for a run, whether I run 10 feet or 100 miles, I can go run, and then I can go back home. And some watches are even fancier than this. Like, they don't even need to go back and plug into the computer, but this one does. I go and I plug it in the computer, and then it details every single mile, every single foot that I ran. I've got a little map. It can show me everywhere I went. I can then go and look and see, wow, that hill felt really hard, but it really wasn't that big, and I was going super slow. And sometimes it's encouraging, and sometimes not so much. But we can do so much. We can test water for purity. We can test soil for the nutrients in it. And if we find out the nutrients aren't good enough to grow things, we can manipulate it and make it better. And we can grow things in near impossible climates. We can put people in space and see to distant galaxies, and you're like, can he talk any faster? And keep on going. But I could. There's so much. And all of this, every last part of it is possible because of this intellect, this thing in humanity that we've been given. An intellect that discovered a method for asking questions, making hypotheses, testing them through experiments, set in controlled environments, analyzing those results, drawing conclusions, and sharing those results. You feel like you're in science class because look at this picture on the screen here. It's coming up here in a second. It's a picture of the scientific method. You're back in school in like 5th grade. But this is what it is. All of the things that we have today as far as science and technology kind of comes to fruition because of this process, repeated over and over and over again, tons and tons and tons of times. It's that process, scientific method, and it's enabled humans to make incredible scientific and technological advances at a rate that, in the next picture here, looks like this. That curve is what happens when you plot exponential data. It's an exponential curve. It's what everybody wants their investments to look like, right? But here's the thing about that. It starts out slow, and over time increases. And the rate at which it increases grows faster and faster and faster. And guess what? It is getting faster. Our technology and knowledge and science are advancing at a faster rate than ever before in the history of the world. And much of that exponential curve, the shooting up in the air that's happened over the past number of years, has happened for this fancy term called, the free flow of information. Maybe you've heard that fancy word, or maybe you're more familiar with the basic real word that everybody knows, Google. It's because of Google, right? It's wild. If you compared like what we know now to what we knew way back then, it's like that sheet of paper folded 50 times. It's like way up high in the sky now. It's mind-bending. In 2010, the CEO of Google, his name was Eric Schmidt, said that every 2 days, get this, because I heard this last week and I couldn't believe it. For every 2 days, this was said in 2010, so it's only gotten crazier since then. For every 2 days that content and information is created in our world right now, or 7 years ago, it was creating the same amount of information as had been created from the beginning of humanity's till 2002 combined. For every 2 days. It's crazy. It's insane. And to be honest, I think it's pretty neat. I think it's pretty wild that that's happening because so much good stuff is happening. Medical stuff is advancing. There's so many good things that are happening. But, and hopefully you knew that there was a but coming, a nice big but. Here is the part where we need to acknowledge something. It's a big one because we have to take this big fat slice of humble pie at this moment because we've advanced so far. We've gotten so far as science and technology is concerned. But as crazy as this information all is, all this data, it doesn't even come close. It's back to that single sheet of paper compared to the 1 times 10 to the 50th power sheets or whatever that equation is. When we compare it to what God knows. God knows so much more. We're not even close. Not even close. In Isaiah 55:9, it says, "For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." In 1 John 3:20, it says, "Even if we feel guilty, God is greater than our feelings, and He knows everything." Everything. He knows everything. We know a lot. God knows everything. God is infinitely more knowledgeable than we are. As we're talking about God's character, what you need to know about it is that God is not a learner. We're learners. We are learning things every single day. God's not a learner. He already knows. God knows. We're talking about God's omniscience. And so as we think about who He is and how this impacts His character, here are some 5 things that you should know. First is this: God knows what we do before we do it. He knows what we do before we do it. And number 2 is God knows what we think before we think it. There's a verse that goes along with that one in Psalm 139:2. It says, "You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts even when I'm far away." God knows. He knows what we do before we do it, and He knows that I'm going to go home and eat ice cream later tonight, and He actually knew that I was going to do that before I thought it, right? He knew that I was thinking it before I was thinking it, and okay, that just got confusing. Number 3, God knows where we go. In Psalm 139:3, the next verse, He says, "You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything I do." He knows everything we do. He knows where you went last night. He knows where you're headed tonight. He knows the last year of your life in greater detail than you do. Number 4, this one I wish you would give us a heads up sometimes, because sometimes things come out of my mouth before I know that they come out of my mouth. But number 4 is God knows what we say before we say it. Wouldn't it be great if you just tapped it on your shoulder and be like, "Nope, just don't do it, okay? Just don't say it. You're going to want to, but just hold off for just a second." In Psalm 139:4, it says, "You know what I'm going to say before I say it, Lord." And then the last one, 5, is God knows what we need before we need it. And that's the one I love the most. In the 5th verse there, it says, "You go before me and follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head." That's the one I cling to, I guess, the most. Because, well, we all know that we need things, and oftentimes we're maybe saying those desperate prayers late at night or just before a certain event happens, and we just need certain things. And so it's a comfort to know God knows I need that. So let me just talk to Him about it. I don't need to be sitting there pleading with Him. Just talk to Him about it. And He'll help me to see, maybe even more than I know, what I need. I think that's powerful. I think there's actually a great example of this in the Bible. There's this one instance when Jesus and His disciples, they're on their way to a different city, a different place, a village, I guess you would say. And as they're on their way, they find themselves at a well outside of the city. And Jesus, He sits down, he's tired, a lot of walking, hasn't eaten much. And He sends His disciples into town to go and get themselves some food, some rations for the next week, whatever it is. Find a place to stay for the next couple of days. So He sends the disciples on ahead, and as He's sitting there at the well, this woman walks up to Jesus. And this woman, she's there at midday, and this is a bit of a warning sign in those days, because you'd go out to the well at early morning so that it was cool, and you wouldn't have to basically sweat all the way back with the hard labor of getting water. And so she comes out, and you kind of can guess some things because she's not going with all the other women. She's kind of going on her own to stay away. She comes out, and it just so happens that this woman is a Samaritan woman, because it's a Samaritan village. And He sees this woman, and Jesus asks her, "Would you please get me a drink of water?" And the woman, I can't imagine, must have looked so perplexed because of the words that come out of her mouth next. She says to Jesus, "Jesus, or sir, why are you asking me for a drink of water? I'm a Samaritan woman." In case you didn't notice, I'm a Samaritan woman, and you're a Jewish guy. We don't mix. We don't ask each other for things. We just avoid eye contact, get our stuff done, and leave. That's how we operate. Why are you asking me for a drink of water? Now, Jesus, being who Jesus is, spices it up a little bit with some fun questions and some fun comments. He says back to her, he says, well, you just don't realize who you're speaking with, because if you did, you'd be asking me for water. You'd be asking me for living water. And the woman, again, is confused because Jesus has no bucket and no rope. And so she asks, well, what kind of water are you talking about? Because you don't have those supplies. And so Jesus says, well, here's the thing, is you need a rope and a bucket to go and get the water that you have. But for me, the water that I have, it doesn't work like that. The water that you have, you drink and you go back home and you drink it up and you grow thirsty again. And you repeat this process day in and day out. But the water that I give isn't like that. The water that I give becomes a bubbling spring inside of you, and it erupts out of you and overflows. That's how my water works, where you won't become thirsty again. She says to Jesus, I want some of that water. So Jesus says, go and get your husband. And she says, well, I don't have a husband. And she says, yeah, you're right, you don't have a husband. You've had 5 of them, and the man you're living with now, you're not married to. I think this kind of offset her a little bit. She's got a past, and he's got her stuff, and he's talking to her, and there's this weird thing, but I think she's starting to get a little snarky. Because, like, who is this Jewish guy talking to me like this? You must be a prophet. You know so much. Obviously, you know about my past. Well, then tell me this, Mr. Prophet. Why is it that you guys, you Jewish people, go off and worship in Jerusalem, and yet we, Samaritans, believe that it's important to worship here at this Mount Gerizim? Why the difference? So Jesus says to her, there's coming a time. You Samaritans, you don't know much about the person you worship, the God you worship. Us Jews, we know all about him, but there is coming a time when true worshipers will worship in spirit and truth. In these locations, they won't mean so much. The woman, eager to show how much she knows, says back, I know that the Messiah is coming, the Christ. And Jesus looks at her and he says, it's me. I am the Messiah. The woman, I'm sure, had the most amazing, wild realization in that moment. She runs back to the village, tells everybody. She says, this man told me everything I ever did. It says in John 4:39, says, many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, he told me everything I ever did. Knowledge. Jesus knew all about her. He knew everything. God knows everything. He knew all about this woman, how many husbands she had, but even more than that, that's not so surprising. More than that, he knew what she needed. He knew what she was looking for. He knew the very thing that she desired. Something that her 5 previous husbands hadn't been able to give her. It's amazing, isn't it? Jesus knew this woman's life. God knows every hair on her head. He's infinitely knowledgeable. But here's the thing about that, and with knowledge in general, when we think about all the information we might know, if that's all that we needed, if just more knowledge was all that we needed to make us happier, to make our lives change, to make things get better, then why aren't we happier yet? I mean, really, why aren't we happier yet? We have access to more information than ever before. It's so prevalent. Why hasn't our happiness factor shot through the roof? That's all we needed. Why are we still looking and searching and desperate for answers? You don't know why? Because happiness is not equated with knowledge or money or any other thing. Knowledge doesn't bring it necessarily, and sometimes it actually acts in the opposite way. Sometimes knowledge is like the inverse thing, where ignorance would be much more blissful? Anybody ever experienced that before? Like, I wish I didn't know. I wish you wouldn't have told me. Or like, you did what before? Like, you actually did that? That's the kind of thing that you might say to someone. Or she said what? That kind of thing that you might say after you hear about the thing that you really never wanted to hear. It just comes out. Or you took the last cookie? My goodness, now I got to be mad at you because I really wanted that cookie. Ignorance can be bliss. Knowledge can be a downer sometimes. We can know almost everything there is to know. And I think we'd still be searching for more. We still wouldn't be satisfied. We could be almost like God. We could know almost everything, and we'd still be searching for something better. Because here's the thing about God's omniscience. God isn't just all-knowing. God is wise. God is wise. God knows what to do with what he knows. There's a difference. We're not so good at that one. I mean, when we see Cheetos, we know what they do, but they taste good. So we're not exactly going to follow the knowledge part of that. We're aware that studying for a test is probably going to help us get a better grade on the test. Doesn't mean we're going to study. We know that a good night of sleep is always a good idea because we always feel better after we have a good night of sleep. It doesn't mean we're going to get it. That Netflix TV show is a little too alluring sometimes. Just because we know things, just because we have information, doesn't mean we're going to do the right thing with that information. That's why when God chose to communicate with us, to have a relationship with us, He did not give us Google. God's gift to man was not Google. That's not where the answer to life's most important questions is. And don't get me wrong, I use Google like every day, multiple times. But that's not where the most important questions are answered. God knows better. God is wise enough not to send us Google. Instead, God gave us the Bible. Instead, God gave us Jesus. It's also why when Jesus taught, I don't know if you know this or not, but he actually used about 30% of his words for information sharing and about 70% of his words for application. That's how Jesus taught. It's not just information, it's what to do with what I've taught you. The what to do part matters. God knew we didn't need a whole ton more information. He knew we needed to know what to do with that information. We needed wisdom. So God gave it to us in the Bible and in Jesus. Because here's the thing, we could stack paper. And we could fold it up multiple times over, as high as we could possibly go with all of the knowledge in the world, and have it reach past the sun so many times. And two things would still be true. Even if we did that, two things would still be true. First, we would not know as much as God, because God is all-knowing. And two, we'd still be found lacking. We would be missing the wisdom that God gives. Knowledge is powerful. All of us know that. And power in the wrong hands, it's pretty dangerous. But what the world needs, more than anything, more than knowledge, is some serious wisdom. Some real wisdom. The more you learn about and understand God's character, especially through Jesus, the more valuable you will be in this world and to this world. Because you'll start using what you know with God's wisdom. Which, when you boil down to it, basically amounts to one question, doesn't it? It basically comes down to the final question of who are you going to trust? Who are you going to trust? We have limits. God does not have limits. He's unlimited. People are not always trustworthy. I think you learned that by the age of 2. It's just reality. God, though, is always trustworthy. People have used their God-given intellect to create some amazing things. Drones, for instance. So much stuff. But none of it matters without purpose and value and meaning, all of which God gives. When Jesus, he spoke to that woman at the well, he said, he offered water that becomes this bubbling spring inside of her, this spring that overflows. I have a feeling most of you have experienced someone like that in your life. Someone who you can tell has this overflowingness to them. You're just around them for like 5 minutes, and it's like, I want to be around you for like 3 hours, not just 5 minutes. Because it just comes out. There's this joy, and it's not superficial happiness, because we've seen plenty of that. It's something deeper. There's a raw joy and earnestness to it. A desire to give and to love and to care like God does. It just goes further, it goes deeper. Every time I've experienced that, it's come from someone who has this serious, full relationship with God in such a way that they rely on God for their wisdom and not other people, not other information. This week, as you're confronted with boatloads of information and you find yourself consuming it more and more and more, remember where the most true wisdom comes from. The most true knowledge comes from. And remember that when we take it, it overflows. Look to the Bible. Look to Jesus. Let them outweigh the things that you read and hear every single day. My challenge is this. Take 5 minutes, maybe 10. 10 minutes would be awesome, but start with 5 if you can't do the 10. 5 minutes this week to, instead of perusing Facebook, instead of watching cable news, instead of Googling a bunch of different things, take those 5 minutes and look to God. And look a bunch of different ways. It could be reading the Bible, chapter at a time. Chapter's about 5 minutes. Read a chapter. It could be praying. It'd be like, hey, God, I know I've got a whole bunch of stuff on my list of things to get done today, and I'm going to probably find myself all filled up with all this other information of how I should do it, when I should do it, why I should do it. Can you please just give me the wisdom to know how to do this the right way, and I can depend on you instead of all this other stuff? 5 minutes this week. If you look for his wisdom this week, I think your week will be better. I think it'll have more meaning, more purpose, and I think you'll make better decisions. That's my challenge, and that's how I'm going to close with a prayer. I'm going to ask God that we would have that reminder this week, that when we wake up in the morning or whatever time, we'd pause and take 5 minutes, or 1 minute even if we have to, because it's just the middle of the day and it's hectic. I'm going to stop for a minute, and I'm going to pray. Whatever that looks like for us, I'm going to ask that God would have this constant reminder hitting us over the head with it so that we could have a better week and we'd have more meaning and purpose and value in our life. Would you pray with me? Dear God, you're where wisdom comes from. There's so much knowledge. There's so much information out there. We have no need to fill our lives with more of that. That's just the reality of it. What we need is more of you. And so, God, as we spend our week this week, going down the bunny trails, going down the normal work stuff, the normal life stuff, I ask that instead of filling our heads and minds and hearts with the information that's just thrown about so loosely in the everyday life, that we'd look to you and that we'd find wisdom where you are, and that it would ring so true and it would change us and change our weeks and our days and our relationships. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.